My name is Donna Haig-Friedman. I direct the Center for Social Policy that's sponsoring this event, and we are a center within the new McCormick Graduate School of Policy Studies. And what I'm going to be doing in the next few minutes is just introducing the Chancellor of UMass Boston, Chancellor Joanne Gora, who will be providing the welcoming remarks, and then after Chancellor Gora speaks, I'll shepherd the rest of the event so that you'll know what we're doing and we'll get going. I just want to say that I'm very pleased that Chancellor Gora is able to be here today. I think it is an expression, her being here is an expression of the commitment that she has made in the last 2 years to making sure that UMass Boston is providing a service to the community. This has been her hallmark, one of her hallmarks, and I'm very, very pleased for her to be here to have that be her expression of the importance of the kind of research that we're unveiling today to the community, to Boston and to Massachusetts. Chancellor Gora has been at UMass Boston since 2001. She came from, She was the provost between 1992 and 2001, the provost and vice president for academic affairs at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. She is the author of 2 books, A Sociologist by Professional Discipline, and in 2002, based upon the record that she has already made here in Boston, she was named one of Women's Business Boston's Women to Watch for 2002. And I would like now just to welcome Chancellor Gora to the podium. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. We are delighted that we can welcome you today to the release of the findings of the Center for Social Policy's National Study of Alternative Staffing Services. And as Dr. Friedman says, the Center for Social Policy is an element in the McCormick School of Policy Studies. And the McCormick School really has a 20-year history of providing public policy analysis and evaluation to decision makers. So I would like to extend a special welcome today to those representatives from state and local government, community-based action programs and agencies, human service agencies, workforce development, and job placement specialists and researchers who are participating in today's event. This event brings together a distinguished panel to discuss the activities of alternative staffing services as they have been analyzed in the Center for Social Policy's national study. Today, the Center releases this report, and it is the result of 2 years of fieldwork and analysis. Alternative staffing services are businesses with a social mission. They are created by community-based organizations and nonprofits. They use temporary staffing business formulas to place job seekers and to keep them employed. And they provide a way to provide transitional employment to workers in need of assistance with job placement. The panelists today will discuss the relevance of the alternative staffing model to the needs of the populations that they serve. And the activities of the alternative staffing organizations are particularly relevant given the current policy interest in developing better mechanisms for job placement for all workers, but particularly for those workers who encounter difficulties in the labor market who may have no one else in their network who can provide job leads for referrals or for job interviews. So the results of this study and this event are meant to inform and to stimulate debate in the workforce development and economic development communities in Boston as well as throughout Massachusetts. This morning's event, as I said a minute ago, is one of the many ways in which the University of Massachusetts Boston fulfills its role of generating knowledge that is relevant to concrete policy issues in the states and the cities. The university's role in the public debate is strengthened when it can provide information about policy innovation to a broad range of stakeholders. And that has been the mission of the McCormick School of Policy Studies for 20 years. Today's event underscores the university's commitment to the urban community and the importance of making a contribution to the economic development of Boston, which is the engine for economic growth in the state of Massachusetts. So thank you all for being here today. I am delighted that we are able to hear Dr. Carey talk about her research. I think her findings today will stimulate a great deal of debate, and we're delighted that Dr. Carey is a member of the Center for Social Policy. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, let's get started. I do want to say that this research and the way in which we've planned the morning is it is an expression of the Center for Social Policy's commitment to bridging the worlds of research, practice, and policy. You will see that in the makeup of the panelists that we have with us that there are persons who are on the front line trying to make those bridges for people who have challenges to getting into the paid workforce, people who are at the more policy level, and people who are actually trying to make that leap themselves into the paid workforce. So we've got all of those perspectives reflected on the panel. I expect that this is going to be a very dynamic debate. And we have planned the format so that Françoise Carey, who is the principal investigator on this study, will provide a short summary of the study and its findings, and then each panelist in turn will be sharing their critique, their thoughts, their ideas about the applicability of the findings to the world and the universe in which they are working. Then we are going to have about 45 minutes for a very interactive conversation between the panelists, Françoise Carey, and all of you. So what I would like to do now is introduce Françoise and all of the panelists. I'm going to introduce everyone right now, and then each person will speak in turn. They've all been given a fairly tight time frame within which to do their talking, and we have a timekeeper up here who's going to be hard-nosed to make sure we have time for a good interactive conversation with all of you. Let me start by introducing Françoise Carey, who in April 2003 became the research director of the Center for Social Policy within the Graduate School of Policy Studies at UMass Boston. I am thrilled that she is our research director. She oversees the Center's Applied Research and Evaluation Research Agenda. She is currently completing this national study of alternative staffing services. The study is part of her broader research agenda analyzing bottom-up union, community, and policy responses to job instability and labor market churning. Previous work includes looking for leverage in a fluid world, innovative responses to temporary and contract work. From 1995 to 2003, Françoise Carey was research director at what is now the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, previously Radcliffe College, at Harvard University, where she implemented the Institute's research agenda on gender, work, and the economy. She has co-directed several Institute research projects, among others, a study of work and family issues for professionals in biotechnology companies funded by the Sloan Foundation, and another on workers in temporary and transient employment funded by the Russell Sage Foundation. Our first panelist is Mary COONAN, and she is currently the director of the Transition to Work Project Hope Career and Workforce Development Collaborative of 8 family shelters: Greater Boston Legal Services, the Center for Social Policy, the Women's Institute for Housing and Economic Development, and the One Family Campaign. Mary has worked in the fields of economic development and popular education in local communities, both in Latin America and on the East Coast, for the past 25 years. Her experience includes designing and implementing revolving loan funds, workforce development initiatives, microfinance programs, and business development services. To her left is Suzanne KENNEY, who for the last 8 years has been the executive director of Project Place, a nonprofit organization providing employment, education, and housing opportunities for homeless individuals. Prior to her experience at Project Place, Suzanne was the administration manager at the Center for Children with Special Needs, New England Medical Hospital. Suzanne has worked 12 years in child welfare agencies in various capacities and in total has over 27 years of experience working in nonprofits. Currently, she serves on the board of the Eureka Communications Boston, an organization committed to the development of leadership among nonprofit executives, and also on the National Eureka Communities Board. And she is a board member of the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance. To her left is Jennifer James. Currently, Ms. James is the Deputy Director of Workforce Development for the Massachusetts Department of Workforce Development, led by Jane Edmonds. In this position, she works with state and local agency partners, nonprofits, and related organizations, developing strategic initiatives to promote more effective and integrated service delivery of employment, training, and education services throughout the Commonwealth. Prior to this post, Jennifer served as the Deputy Advisor for Worker Training in the Governor's Office for 2 years. The Governor created this position to formulate and implement the administration's new policy initiatives related to workforce development. To Jennifer's left is Julia Tripp of TRIPP Consulting. She is a communications consultant and assists communities in figuring out consumer involvement strategies in homeless continuum of care planning and homeless management information systems implementation. She's created the Chart Your Path to Empowerment training model and is a member of the National Technical Assistance Team that the Center for Social Policy is heading for HUD across the country. She works part-time as the Women's Outreach Coordinator at an AIDS service organization and is a speaker on HIV/AIDS prevention and safety. As a member of the National Coalition for the Homeless, she uses various media such as public speaking, workshops, dance, and song to motivate people experiencing homelessness to get involved, increase understanding of, and make statements on social issues. And finally, to her left is Neil Sullivan, who is the Executive Director of the Boston Private Industry Council. The mission of the Boston PIC is to strengthen Boston's communities and its workforce by connecting youth and adults with education and employment opportunities that prepare them to meet the skill demands of employers in a changing economy. The council itself is a business majority, currently chaired by William Van Fazen, chairman, and the chancellor is on the board of the PIC. The board has representation from organized labor, government, education, and community-based organizations. The PIC serves as Boston's Workforce Investment Board, which implements numerous initiatives, including Welfare to Work and the chartering of one-stop career centers. Before joining the PIC in 1992, Neil served as Policy Director for the City of Boston and Chief Policy Advisor to Mayor Raymond Flynn for 9 years. So we have a very distinguished panel, people who are going to be representing and sharing very diverse perspectives about the issues that are raised in this study. And here they are. Françoise.
I hope I can stand higher than the microphone. Good morning, and thank you, Donna. Thank you all for coming, and special thanks to Chancellor Gara and to the panelists for participating. Before I start, I want to thank the members of the research team who fully took part in data collection, analysis, and writing of the report over the course of this 2-year study. And they're all sitting towards the end of the table, and they're Joaquin Herons. Yeah, wave. Joaquin, as of the past 10 days, is Dr. Herons, finished his dissertation. Dr. Dory Seavey, Carla Vickers, Ashley Hall, and Rebecca Keegan, and Nancy Waters, if she's here, edited the report that you have in hand. I also want to thank the staff of the Center for Social Policy, particularly Donna Friedman, Sheila D'Alessandro, Brian Sokol, and everyone who is helping today with logistics. And also want to point out that the study was funded by a grant from the Ford Foundation, initially made to Radcliffe. The project was completed at the Center for Social Policy, and we present findings today. So what is alternative staffing? Basically, alternative staffing services are job brokering businesses that were created by community-based organizations and national nonprofits. They engage in temporary and temp-to-perm job brokering, meaning essentially that they send workers out on job assignments, as a staffing company would. They are fee-for-service, dual bottom-line businesses that specialize in placing workers who typically encounter a broad range of barriers or obstacles to employment. Now, I came to study these organizations because, as Donna pointed out, I have long been interested in the issue of job quality, particularly for workers who face barriers to employment or are vulnerable in the labor market relative to other workers. The activities of these services has relevance to workforce development issues in a couple of ways. First, the study highlights what makes for effective job brokering, which is now a key element of workforce development policy for state and federal governments. And the study also highlights what might be models of transitional employment for workers who face barriers. The goals of the study essentially have been to identify alternative staffing as a sector, to determine what organizations are active within it, and to document what they do. Let me provide a bit of context. I want to provide a quick summary of how community-based organizations and national nonprofits get involved with alternative staffing. Basically, they contend with temporary work and day labor in several ways. First, temporary staffing has become a primary means of hiring for entry-level positions in a number of industries, light manufacturing being a good example. The job seekers that CBOs serve encounter day labor companies, home care agencies, and staffing services in their job searches. Second, temp work is an option to explore for CBOs that seek to facilitate job access for workers that face labor market disadvantages. And third, temp work in the conventional part of the industry has risks for workers in terms of pay and working conditions. And CBOs seek to alleviate these risks by running their own services. So with alternative staffing, CBOs and other nonprofits address the two-sided nature of temp work. On one hand, they try to capitalize on the potential of temporary work to create job access and to create a path to better jobs. And on the other hand, they seek to substitute staffing models that serve workers better than the conventional staffing industry. Another piece of context is that fee-for-service job brokering by these organizations is one among several forms of labor market intermediation for workers, particularly workers with mid-level and low-level skills. And the existing network of CBO-based and union-based training providers, as well as the one-stop career centers, is currently being reframed as an infrastructure of labor market intermediaries. And it's an infrastructure that is being entrusted with performing job brokering for workers in an ongoing way. We're not sure how we're going to get there, but that's the goal. So in our view, however, among all these types of intermediaries, alternative staffing plays a unique role in job brokering for workers with labor market disadvantages. It addresses a constellation of needs and of requirements that are not typically addressed through operations of the conventional one-stop career centers or through the operation of the conventional staffing industry. A couple of words about the study itself. You all have a report. Our two main questions is we looked at this sector with a couple of analytical lenses. One, we asked what are the unique characteristics of alternative staffing services as social enterprises and as actors in the workforce development field. And second, we asked ourselves what did we learn about alternative staffing services as competitors to the conventional staffing industry, the Labor Readies and the Kellys and the Alstons, etc. The data collection entailed a national search, interviews with 27 organizations by phone, lengthy interviews. We visited 8 organizations and interviewed staff, workers, and customer businesses. I'll now make a few observations about the key findings. First, there's quite a broad variety of organizations that give birth to these kinds of staffing services, and this broad variety was a surprise to us. They include national nonprofits like Goodwill. You probably have all heard of the Goodwill Temporary Services. It also includes Experience Works, which does employment services for workers 45 plus, often in rural areas. It includes all kinds of community-based organizations that may be engaged in social service, community action, or economic development broadly defined. They are homeless service providers, employment and training programs, ex-offender programs, and programs for workers with disabilities. In some cases, labor unions, a labor union local or a central labor council spawned an alternative staffing service. A parapublic organization in one case, which is the nonprofit corporation that runs prison industries in Florida. And in a single case, one was created by a workforce investment board, and it's One Stop Career Center. Now, that one was shut down after we interviewed them because of the recession. I always get laughters when I say that, but it's true. Because of the recession and because of opposition from the conventional staffing industry that served on their board. We can talk about that more later. The population served, they serve a very broad range of job seekers. They serve people who experience labor market disadvantage broadly defined. This may be due to a recent spell of homelessness, incarceration, a recent receipt of public assistance. All of that may have resulted in a lack of documented recent work history. Or the labor market disadvantage may be due to long-standing problems like an extended spell of unemployment. Second, they serve people whose labor market difficulties have been developed as a result of barriers such as discrimination, racial and ethnic discrimination, or lack of accommodation of disability in the workplace. And third, sometimes they serve people who have been just simply ignored by the conventional staffing industry, like older workers. And this variety is important to note because some services place the hardest to employ in employers' eyes, while others place workers that have fewer hurdles. But in all cases, alternative staffing services place job seekers that business customers are reluctant to hire on their own and on first look. As I said, there's a broad range of organizations in terms of characteristics, and that's all summarized in the report. These tend to be rather fairly small businesses by industry standards, although not that small. Most of them are between $500 and $1 million in gross revenue. I should have never made these rules about time. Quite a few are over $5 million gross revenue yearly. As I said, I point you to characteristics because we gathered a fair amount of information on the workers served, the size of the numbers of people placed, etc. Okay, what I want to do now is talk a bit about the goals and the strategies that these organizations have adopted for meeting goals. The first broad goal that we identified is basically to improve upon the conventional temporary staffing and day labor experience. Now, this may be trite as a goal, but it's an important one for workers in low-wage and low-skill sectors. Many of the people served by these services interface with the conventional staffing industry, but they interface with the least attractive companies within it, such as small day labor companies. So transforming the employment experience is a goal. So they achieve that goal in several ways. First, and the obvious thing that they have to do, is establish access to employment. And this is a minimal requirement. Workers experience this service differently from other forms of placement assistance. And I will do a quick quote. One worker said to us, "The biggest thing to me is that they place you into a job. A lot of placement places aren't really job placement. They're like job searchers. They help you look for a job." Another one said, "Here you fill out an application, go to the job, and then they support you and deal with your issues to keep you on the job." Second thing that they do is that they provide conditions of employment that are more respectful of worker rights. In the report, we use the phrase basic respect of worker rights, simply as a shorthand to cover adherence to employment and labor standards and avoidance of some of the exploitative practices that sometimes occur at the low end of the staffing industry. They provide the proper worker compensation rate, they limit unpaid waiting time, they provide safety equipment, and so on. Third, some of them follow a policy advocacy agenda to reform or to regulate the staffing industry, particularly the day labor industry. The second broad goal of these organizations is that they facilitate job transition and job progression for some workers. Quite a number of them engage in temp to perm placements to enable workers to get access to regular jobs. And this approach makes use of employer practices of screening temporary workers in view of longer-term employment. It basically makes use of the try before you hire model of temporary work. And we identified elements that matter in pursuing temp to perm assignments for these services. and those will seem obvious to you in retrospect, but they include identifying customer businesses that are heavy users of temporary workers in entry-level position, but they have to be businesses that have a growing job base so that regular job opportunities open up on a somewhat predictable basis so that the service can place workers in regular work. And they have to be businesses whose entry-level positions entail key benefits, like health insurance. Otherwise, there's no point in investing all that work and effort into helping people. So we summed up the characteristic approach of alternative staffing as one that combines, on one hand, a perseverant sales effort and proactive customer service, and on the other hand, supports to workers before and during placement. And the supports are extensive, they're numerous, they're multifaceted, they address job performance, there's a lot of job coaching involved, but they also address life issues that impinge upon job performance, help with transportation, help with childcare, help with housing. I'm skimming. In sum, we have a picture of a sector that performs job brokering effectively. At the minimum, these organizations perform job brokering in ways that protect workers relative to what might happen to them otherwise. And they provide transitional employment. In most ambitious ways, they enable workers to transition from casual employment into regular position. And they're very adept at enabling workers to do so because they have a lot of practice with day-to-day supervision and support of workers during assignment. So in closing, having said all that, what I want to add, and I want to remind us all, that this form of job brokering, however supportive of workers, is not a substitute for the functions of a fully developed employment and training system or for career ladder programs within firms. They have solved the job brokering function, but they still need to exist in a system in which there are supports for training, help with health insurance, help with child care, and all the other things that make it possible for workers to work. I had set up some questions, but I'm going to save them for later. Thank you.
My goal is to not have Brian show me that out of time card by the end. It hurts. It does. Our response actually from transition to work is going to be a response that's from an agency that is working in the workforce development field. What we do is to help people to find jobs. But also it's going to be a response. We're in the process of investigating starting alternative staffing agencies. So part of the response that I give will be based on our experiences as we've gone forward. A little bit about transition to work is that we are a network of homeless shelters that work with homeless families, and also other institutions such as the McCormick Institute that are helping us to meet our mission. The first thing that I think is important is to contextualize what we're looking at. And I like to use images, so I thought of, if for any of you who are hikers and who are going up a mountain, if you've been on many different hikes, the paths are very different, and the paths they're laid out to avoid the obstacles. And I think that that's important to remember that none of us in our job search it's most likely not a linear path, that we move in ways in which we avoid the obstacles. Well, there is a subsect of the people that we work with that are the very hard to place or disadvantaged workers that have some obstacle, like they're ex-offenders or they're limited English speakers, or they have a gap in their work history. And sometimes, just like in the path, you have to overcome these incredible obstacles by building a bridge, or sometimes there's a rope ladder, but they're means to help people overcome extreme obstacles. And that's the way that we approached looking at the alternative staffing agency. In our workforce development experience, we have learned a lot of things, and we know that what works is a package of support systems. We've spent, over this past year, a year looking at what are these support systems that need to be in place. And we found that what we really need are comprehensive assessments, legal advocacy to secure public benefits, economic empowerment education so that people can self-select the directions in which they want to go. Brokering services. Francoise mentioned earlier that the workforce development field is moving in the direction of intermediaries, and I think that's an important concept because we are learning a lot through the process of how important it is to connect on both ends of the sector with the people that we're working with directly, but also with the businesses. Next step education opportunities, encouragement, mentoring, and also transportation, childcare, healthcare. And lastly, for the folks that we're working with, and I think also many people in the neighborhood, stable housing. So when we looked at the possibility of starting alternative staffing agency, I think I just want to mention briefly there were two things that came into mind. The first one was that the staffing agencies are entering more and more into the field of employment. We know that some of our partners, particularly Pine Street Inn, who works with folks who work with the day laborers every single day, the interaction is there. So that's a reality. And I think that we need to look at how we interact with a reality that is in front of us. Now, the second thing that came to mind is that the people that we work with, we're seeing more and more immigrants. Approximately right now, 35% of the people that we see are immigrants with limited English abilities, and also ex-offenders and people with work history, limits in their work history. We need to find a way to serve those people as well. And the alternative staffing agency is a way that we're seeing as a first step for folks that are moving in the direction of living wage job. Now, our ultimate goal has always been, and our mission is, to look for jobs that provide living wages according to MassVest standards. Now, that includes a lot of work to get to that way. Now, I'm going to go back to the image that I started with in the beginning. When you're on a path towards the mountain and you come to these obstacles, we need to make sure that the bridge is in fact a bridge and the people don't get to the other side and take a rest in the shade is wonderful. And we say, well, isn't that great? We provided a bridge and everything's dandy and they're fine. I think Francoise mentioned that this is in the context of a broader workforce development system. And that's absolutely essential, that we think of it in those terms. That the people who come to us are not only looking at the alternative staffing is going to solve all of their problems. Plus, it's not going to be the effective path for everyone. It's for a certain sector of the people that we work with. I just wanted to mention that we have been meeting since August looking at the alternative staffing agency as an option, and I wanted to mention the partners that we're looking at this option with. Fenway CDC, who's here today, Pine Street Inn, also represented here, Mission Maine, WEIU, and Brookview House, and Project Hope Transition to Work, and the network of people that we work with within our network. Also, I wanted to mention that Francoise has been playing the role of a mentor. I've got that card already. And Francoise has been playing the role of mentor, and I think that that's important to mention because it makes it a living research. And Donna mentioned in the beginning that the interaction between the research and actual praxis is important, and this is happening on an ongoing way in which Francoise is helping us to fly through steps that we would have all had to explore on our own, which we would have, but Francoise's presence has really allowed that to move a lot quicker. Now, I think there are a few important things to mention. The first one is that I think services have to be provided within this context of the broader workforce development. I mentioned that already. That is absolutely key, because otherwise it doesn't work. It becomes an issue that is not going to lead people to living wage job. The second, I think, is that alternative staffing agencies need to be very selective in the businesses that we work with, that we have to have clear criteria of why we want to work with them, and that there is a possibility of a path for movement. The third is that alternative staffing agencies need to promote contracts with businesses with room for a possibility of temp to perm. And fourth, I think that we need to be very clear of our own goals, or we won't be able to maintain our mission focus and why we are thinking about getting into it in the first place. And finally, I think that we need to have an advocacy agenda. This came out in the research that there are some agencies that were working in the research that do have an advocacy agenda, and this is absolutely, I think, essential for keeping us on our mission focus of changing the policies that are not helpful to the people that we're working with. I think there's some advantages to the staffing agency also for us as agencies. The bottom line is that we're helping people to move towards finding living wage jobs anyway. The income that comes from staffing agency is something that is over and above what we need to do to raise funds for ourselves. And I think we need to have the full system, but the thought of having some extra funding coming in that's going to help people be placed is really important. Finally, I think also we mentioned in our last meeting that the possibility of having a different relationship with the businesses that we already have relationships with is extremely important. It's different when you come saying, we have someone for you to employ, and the thinking that it might be out of charity, as opposed to we're a business partner and we're here to solve your problems. We try to take that in our daily work, but I think it is very different when you're coming as a business to interact with another business. I'd also like to mention in closing that I think that there are a few areas of research that would be important to continue. The first is to have a stronger understanding of how the staffing agency actually does help people to move towards a living wage job. And I think that would be a longitudinal study, but we need to have that data. I mean, our belief and from our own work is that it does take these many different paths and support systems over a period of time, and it doesn't happen within the constraints of a year. And many of the funders that we work with, and particularly from the government sector, are wanting us to report within a year time frame. And we need to know more about that. The second is that I think that we need to have a clear understanding of the costs. That the costs are the cost of this wraparound, broader workforce development context, and the cost of doing business in an alternative staffing agency, because I think it helps us with our advocacy agenda, and it also helps us to know how we're moving forward in a way that is effective for people. And I got the out of time anyway. So, thank you.
Hi, folks. Can everybody hear me in the back? Great. I don't usually have trouble at my own dining room table getting what I need, but I'm not sure if folks in the back can hear me. Great. I'm SUZANNE KENNEY from Project Place, and I think Donna gave you a thumbnail sketch about what we do. My comments today are going to be reflective of how I see things. I'm not a research analyst. I'm a practitioner. And so I'm going to give you an on-the-ground perspective of what we're doing at Project Place to help men and women who've experienced homelessness live an independent life. We've been around for 3.5 decades. No, I was not there the day the door opened, but it sometimes feels like that. About 12 years ago, though, we started, we were calling them back then just economic development initiatives. Today we call them social enterprises. I don't know what we'll call them in a few years from now, but as long as we can get some attention as to what we're doing, because I think they are practical solutions to working with our population. We started a business called Project Pepsi. We have a lot of projects going on at Project Place. And it was a third-party vending distribution business that would employ men and women experiencing homelessness. Since then, we've started a second business called Clean Corners, Bright Hopes, and it's a public maintenance program. The things that resonated with me in this report and that really on a day-to-day basis we experience at Project Place is that we are working with a very difficult population who on their own have had very limited access to mainstream employment, either through their own hesitation or the barriers that they face in their own lives, or because folks are hesitant to hire someone who lacks a formal education, who is not living in a permanent address. And so, you know, true to my friends at the Center for Social Policy, I will share with you that about 90% of our folks are experiencing issues with addiction. About 30% have some mental illness, and about another 90% have some criminal background. So it's pretty obvious what some of these barriers may be in getting full-time work. So what we do is provide what's transitional, considered transitional employment. And we hire about 50 people a year through these two businesses. Transitional in that folks are with us for 6 months, and that we provide wraparound services like individual counseling in the form of case management, housing assistance, recovery meetings, and at the same time we are giving someone a paycheck so that that immediately starts to address their homeless circumstances. The social enterprises, again, I think this was mentioned earlier, they are small businesses that generate revenues to support a social purpose. But something that wasn't mentioned in the report that I just would caution folks about running small businesses, you need a skill set among your staff as well as supporting your mission. We have some really, really kind, committed social work types at Project Place and some excellent teachers. What we had to do in the last couple of years was kind of turn our staffing pattern on its head and hire MBAs. And what happened was that we also had to pay them at a different pay rate. So it was culture shock at Project Place. And as I visited other social enterprises across the country, recognized that many organizations had the same issue, and they would pay on the low side of what an MBA would get in the private sector and on the high side of what our wonderful social work and teaching staff would get. And we've tried to stay true to that until the state budget cuts. But that's another discussion. Again, what's critical, I think, to our success with our clients, and I'm going to share some of that in a moment, is that there are services from the moment you walk in the door that will help you get a permanent residence, which is very difficult to do in a 6-month period, and we are not successful at it in 6 months. We make a commitment to our folks for 2 years, even if they are, we only see them on a day-to-day basis in the course of 6 months. We let them know from intake that we're going to love you for the next 2 years, which means we will be hounding you, we will be calling you, we will be visiting you. And so we actually start a career plan on intake because we recognize that our folks, with all those barriers and even with the supportive environment that we provide and the paycheck, will still probably only get a job averaging, and I think last fiscal year it was $9.96 an hour. It is not going to change their life. So we call it a stopgap job, and we commit to providing services beyond their placement in a job. Last fiscal year, 63.5% of our folks obtained stable employment after graduating from one of our 2 businesses. Tom Brady of the Patriots has about the same passing completion rate. And I know he gets paid a heck of a lot more than Project Place to do what we do. So I think it's an incredible investment. And to Mary's point earlier, we have quantified what it costs to help someone get a job and live independently. And so I'm going to tell you what that is. And for those of you who are public policy people, just let me tell you what it means as soon as I tell you what it is. It is about $12,000 per person. We pay people wages during the 6 months they're there. So please consider that it's also wages that they are getting. And they get at a minimum $6.75 an hour, and they can leave us making about $9 an hour. So that's what it takes us to get someone a job and to keep it for a year. That said, 1 year later, about 69% of our folks are still employed. The statistic that I think is most reflective of what we're doing is that 100% of those folks who kept their job for 1 year had never had a history of keeping a job for that length of time before. And rarely is that ever reported. So we've given folks an opportunity to live independent and productive lives. And yes, there are people who slip. Again, we try to track folks for a very long period of time. We don't work alone in this. We have a lot of friends that are present today, heading up organizations, are working very hard every day. So we are part of a larger group of folks. So I've seen the signs, and I'm going to, again, leave it from that on-the-ground perspective.
Good morning. Again, my name is Jennifer James, and I work at the Department of Workforce Development, which is our new title since some recent changes by the legislature. But moving from the ground to about 10,000 feet up, I'm going to slightly shift gears and I think try to bring to you two different points this morning. The first one, we've mentioned the Career Center system several times, and it's mentioned in this study. And so my office actually monitors, works with, partners with the local level workforce boards and career centers. Neil Sullivan is sitting to my left, so I will leave a lot of the detail on how things play out in Boston for his remarks. But I wanted to talk about the Career Center system because I think in many ways it's already been referred to as the public system of workforce development services that complement or hopefully relate to alternative staffing industries, community-based organizations, and other kinds of organizations that provide more intensive service delivery for unemployed folks. I also just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish at the state level related to the Career Center system, as well as what I think the study implicates for a greater focus in statewide policymaking related to career ladder programs, incumbent worker development to boost wages. So first of all, for those of you who don't know, we have 32 career centers, full-service career centers across the state, 4 limited satellite centers. The origin of the Career Center system, although it started on a competitive demonstration pilot project, came out of the federal government, has since been codified in the Workforce Investment Act of 1998, and is up for reauthorization as of this year. So we are standing at a crossroads to some degree in how state policy, federal policy will continue to influence the public workforce development system. The reason that's important is because the federal government in many ways dictates a policy of universal access for the Career Center system. It means that a career center with limited resources to keep its lights on has to serve anyone who walks through its door. So in some ways that presents some limitations in how you can focus your service delivery. And in addition, WIA was very specific about giving workforce boards and career centers local control over their policy focus, how they charter their career centers, and really the ways in which they focus service delivery in their area. So it presents an interesting predicament for state-level policy in that I think what we're trying to do is create more of a framework so that local-level operators and policy folks can then work within a framework of baseline standards for career centers and workforce boards, but make it meaningful for their community and for their region. Just some brief background on the Career Center system, because I think everyone has a different perception of what the career centers do. I actually got my first job through a career center, through one of Neil's centers, and so I have both firsthand experience as well as sort of bird's eye perspective from my current job. The Career Centers in FY03 serviced or provided at least one service to over 170,000 individuals, the 32 centers across the state. Of that, 43% of those individuals were actually on or receiving unemployment insurance benefits, which is, I think, unexpected to some degree in that implies there are numerous number of individuals who have a job, who are looking for a better job, or who are at a career center for another reason other than trying to find a job. If you look at sort of the rest of the population, only 7% of those individuals of the 170 were TANF recipients or former. So again, this is not a system that is focused solely on low-income or low-wage individuals. One can argue it's universal access, and that's precipitating the focus in a career center. But again, that's what we saw in FY03. If you think about the service delivery components, while the majority of services are very self-oriented, resource-oriented, and very job search focused, which I think was a point in this particular study, 58% or more than 99,000 individuals participated in some related workshop, resume writing, career search, that are free through the career centers, oftentimes. 51%, more than 87,000 individuals, received some sort of career planning or counseling service. 24%, or more than 41,000 individuals, completed or received an occupation or educational assessment, so looking at their basic skills or their occupational skills through a variety of tools. And then only 7%, or nearly 11,000 people, were enrolled in or connected to training through the Career Center system. And of those, the majority, more than 30%, enrolled in business management and administration services, 16% enrolled in adult education or GED related services, 8%, more than almost 9%, hospital and health related training, and then lastly, around 7% in language skills, ESOL. So I think that gives you sort of a general notion of what the activity level is at a career, at a typical career center. Again, we have different career centers across the state. Some are highly functioning. Some we're trying to work with now to kind of bring everyone up to a certain standard or a certain level of performance. And that is, I think, a good segue into, I think, what we're trying to accomplish at the state level through the administration, through the legislature. We, too, are struggling to keep our funding for the career centers. While a lot of it is federal, there is a significant line item in the budget that supports the infrastructure of those centers and is not limited by who you can serve. It's very critical, very important to keeping the lights on. We being the Department of Workforce Development, we've been working with the administration to develop an action plan, which involves 5 different strategies to, again, get at baseline consistency and service delivery throughout the Career Center system. Really, really quickly, I'm happy to take questions later. One strategy is raising the visibility of the centers. Many people report they have no idea what it is, or if they went to it, they really didn't know it was a publicly funded center. Increasing resources. In general, I've spent a lot of my time on a fundraising strategy for the system. One focus is on the career centers itself. I'm actually hopefully going down to DC tomorrow to try to pitch some ideas about new tools and resources for the career centers. But that's an overall critical need. We can no longer just rely on federal funding to support the baseline infrastructure costs of the career centers. Thirdly, we're looking at consistent services. What do we do in Greenfield compared to Boston for a job seeker or an employer? We, too, are a dual-focused system. We are there to serve employers and job seekers. And I think the next strategy, which is engaging employers in the system, really speaks to what I heard the first 2 panelists talk about, as well as Francoise. We need to better understand how to meet the needs of employers in a way that makes them want to use the system, so that we have something to offer them as we're also looking to place people in jobs. And the 5th piece of that strategy is more of an internal in-house housekeeping sort of point, which is clarifying the roles and responsibilities at the state and local level around administration of funding, as well as the mission of our respective workforce boards, career centers, and the state level system. So in addition, the administration, Governor Romney, is very interested in the career centers themselves as well as education and job training. And I think as we are at this crossroads with the Workforce Investment Act, there is a real push, and Neil certainly felt this, to focus more on the placement between the job seeker and the employer and really refocus some of our job search energies at the Career Center system on placement issues and measuring that related to outcomes. And that is a very big shift for the Career Centers. Well, that sounds sort of obvious. In fact, that was not sort of the original intent and mission of the Career Center systems as they were initially rolling out. So I also just wanted to talk about a couple of points in the study that I thought were applicable and interesting to my world, or the 10,000 foot up world. The first is that there's a very big difference between centers that are job search oriented, career planning oriented, that are almost really the extension of what we used to use libraries for around career planning and job search information, looking at employers. In fact, we have a really strong partnership with the library system, sharing MIS tools, but the Career Center system has become a stronger version of that, versus placement in jobs, which I really think the alternative staffing industry is looking at, and again is specific and appropriate for certain kinds of job seekers out there. So, my question is, can our Career Centers work with alternative staffing agencies to better leverage their collective services? I think the workforce boards can play a role in making that relationship happen. I think a presentation of this particular piece to the Massachusetts Workforce Board Association would get the dialogue started. And we've also tried to do some work around getting grants for specific populations, job seekers with disabilities, people who are ex-offenders. And so we're trying to make strides within the Career Center system. But I think there's a relationship to be made with the alternative staffing industry. Second, I think the study shows that oftentimes, for a reason, alternative staffing industries specialize in populations, and that's an issue that we're really grappling with the Career Center system. Universal access over prioritization of customers, and I'll tell you, we haven't answered that question yet, but it's something we're definitely struggling with. In that, does it have a greater impact on outcomes for job seekers and workers if you're specializing in your population and your service delivery? Thirdly, I actually really believe in temporary employment as a way to access the job market. I wrote my thesis on that I worked with Joaquin, who's one of the authors at MIT on that, and I actually looked at labor supply for the IT sector and whether or not there were career advancement pathways for lower skilled workers up to higher paid positions using the temp market to kind of get your foot in the door. So I truly believe in that as an access point, but I also believe that we have to focus on career ladders within companies to build steps to wage gains, and that is something that we're trying to do with a variety of incumbent worker training programs. The governor is very interested in additional investments in education and training, and briefly, as is actually the legislature, they're working on language as we speak around investments in additional job training at workplaces, but specifically, the governor looked at non-degree tuition assistance or loans, which we don't have in the state now, which I think will really help with short-term training and lower-skilled workers. And we're trying to get a pilot off the ground even without new legislation. And in addition, he talked about partnerships with higher education, one-stop career centers, workforce boards, employers to build a regional team that works on workplace training. I'm getting the ad.
Hi, my name is Julia Tripp, and the problem with being third or fourth is that everybody else has said some of the things you were going to say, and what makes it worse is they might have even said it better than you were going to say it. So that being said, I'm a consultant, as you might have heard, for Center for Social Policy, but for TRIPP Consulting, and as such I work with the Center for Social Policy and also for HUD. And my role is more as a watchdog than a cheerleader, really for anything, and especially for this. And while Francois was at Radcliffe beginning her research or implementing her research work around some of these issues, I was just finishing a turn of about 10 years as a day labor worker with a temporary agency. And this was back in the 80s. So while I was excited to learn that there was such a response to the genuine need of semi-skilled workers, a lot has changed since I was in the workforce, and that was really good for me to see, especially around advocating for workers' rights, acting as a protective buffer between the worker and the employer, and as has already been mentioned, ensuring adherence to employment and labor standards and avoiding exploitive practices, which I well know about, that other agencies did engage in. And I didn't realize until I read the report that the daily pay that I received was actually I was being charged a fee on a daily basis that was cumulative, and I didn't realize the impact of that until I read the report. So it was really good to see that those kinds of issues are being addressed. As well, some of the issues that I highlight are actually addressed by some of the comments that Jennifer made, Suzanne made, and that were made by the first agency. And I want to commend your work that you're both doing. I think they're really important, and I'm really glad to hear about that. Clearly, these kinds of agencies are effective safety nets for many people by providing a steady income, that they address the unique needs of people who are marginalized. They act as a marketing agency, and they place people in positions and do the kind of follow-up that was missing back when I was a day laborer. I think it's important that workers also have choice. It seems that they can choose long-term, short-term, intermittent work, and many people do choose to not work at long-term permanent positions. Don't clearly want that. I thought there were two excellent examples. Unfortunately, there weren't more. You were limited in terms of how many agencies you could actually study or profile. But I thought the Emergency Staffing Solutions, ESS, and Core Temps were excellent examples. Core Temp for developing procedures and agreements to maximize the temporary to permanent conversion, and customizing their services for the customers that are strategies I think that really are enhancing the workers' experience. And their attention to better wage scale jobs and permanent jobs with benefits I thought was excellent. Also, Staffing Solutions was an excellent example of exclusive placement of ex-offenders through their strategies of developing long-term relationships with large business customers who can hire many workers and prepare workers better for workplace culture and rules and procedures. And I thought that was really critical. I see a lot of people that are trying to re-enter the workforce who simply don't understand what that whole workplace culture is about and need a lot of assistance around developing that set of skills. However, one of the things that concerned me as I read this, I just came back from a number of conferences. One, where there was a workshop on something called social exclusion indicators. And they said you need to look in your community for what would be considered social exclusion indicators. And one of the things they mentioned was the fact that many women who were pregnant were having children with low birth weights, and they connected that to the lack of nutrition. They connected that to the not having supermarkets in the community, and they connected that to the fact that supermarkets would move into those communities because they weren't clean and well maintained, and they connected that to the sanitation department, which they actually got to come in and clean it up and so forth. The next thing, it was reversed, and within a year they began to notice a difference, and in 5 years they no longer had that problem of having some of the lowest birth weights. And so that was an example of a social exclusion indicator, and I couldn't help but feel that the development and the emergence of these kinds of agencies that address this problem is a kind of big social exclusion indicator. And so while the report gives examples of agencies that are doing really great work and show what's possible, people who are, and I notice the terms that we use to describe people who are being challenged, disadvantaged, people who are transitional workers who are facing barriers and obstacles. Some of those barriers and obstacles are, yes, of our own making, but I want to call it for what it is for me. And my experience with a lot of it was about discrimination. And I think it's sad that, while this demonstrates how discrimination, that there's discrimination that creates the emergence of these agencies that are doing really great work trying to reverse this, I also think it's really sad that the employment industry does not yet adequately support these enterprises that seek to create job opportunities for marginalized or disadvantaged individuals. And I understand you're doing some legislative work that's applicable to that, and I think that's where we need to continue our efforts. I also wanted to ask, along the themes of looking at these as social exclusion indicators, you made the analogy, the first speaker, I can't remember your name, about building those bridges over things and making those rope ladders that are necessary. I thought it was a really great analogy. But this whole social indicator exercise was about looking at who is being excluded, who are they, what are they excluding them from, So it's who, it's what they're excluding them from, and who's doing the exclusion. Anyway, there's a third question, but I was thinking, who's under those ropes? Who are creating those little ladders to get over, and to really look at and address those issues, which I guess is legislative, again, going back to that kind of analysis of who's causing this huge impediment to, what drives people into drug addiction, substance abuse, what's creating, I'm doing a presentation on mental health and homelessness, and I think of people going through the homeless system and exacerbating mental health issues. I know. And yet, untreated, I'm now functioning as a fairly sane and stable person. Anyway, moving along, some of my strongest concerns were about potential for people becoming trapped in semi-skilled positions. So even though the Emergency Staffing Solutions organization has a great placement strategy, right now primarily their staffing opportunities were janitorial. And that was a real concern to me. And it seems to me that an opportunity for a job that starts out as a temporary position that can end up, yes, is desirable, but if you get a temporary job as a janitor, a permanent position in this field is unlikely to lead to an executive salary. And it appears that entrepreneurial efforts are also unlikely to arise out of the average individual performing janitorial services unless there were supports and encouragement from the staffing sector to encourage that development. So I would ask these questions as we entrust these agencies with job brokering as for disadvantaged workers. These are some of the questions that I would ask us to think about. And I forgot to mention that unfortunately I have to leave because I do have another meeting that I'm supposed to be there at 11. That is a meeting of a group of consumers that I work with at the Center for Social Policy. So I have to sort of hit and run, but hopefully this will infuse the conversation later with some thoughts. Questions. Are these agencies more enterprise or social change? And what do their missions speak to? And in the report, I didn't see enough about their missions. And I even got online after, listening to that social exclusion workshop and looking up a little bit about social enterprises. I really wanted to know more about, do their missions speak to changing and impacting the lives of people that they serve. And some of my concerns about advocacy is that advocates speak for you, not to you, and do we empower people adequately through these agencies? Is that a role that they're taking on? Also, I asked the question, can the same society that has created the dynamics of discrimination create and sustain viable alternative models? And these services also work differently for different people. I, too, worked eventually with a career center not many years ago. And I have 1 minute. I just don't believe it. I started to say 10 minutes seems interminable, and other times it seems way too short. How could I just be 10 minutes? They work differently for different people. And I just wanted to say as a caveat that we need to be ensured that it is fairly, all the people that work with these agencies need to get the equitable treatment and access. See if I can do this really quickly. It's important that monitoring and oversight agencies be created. I think PIC is part of what that does, but I would ask, are there people who are working in the industry as well as advocacy and industry participants on these monitoring and oversight boards? We need to create, yes, more professional and technical job opportunities and look at what are the criteria for success for these agencies, their stability and profitability, or the stability and mobility of their workers. Income guidelines that make one eligible for assistance are often, this is in regards to child care, are often too low to be livable. And an increase to a livable income disqualifies you for assistance. Do these agencies provide child care? How are we dealing with those issues legislatively? And I also wanted to ask how many of these agencies place disadvantaged workers on their own workforce? Unless we victimize people that we purport to help, these agencies should ask themselves these questions. How do we ensure that this alternative route doesn't become a way of trapping individuals in low-wage jobs for their lifetime, unless it's by choice? And I didn't see enough also emphasis on job progression myself, so while that's important to address, I didn't see enough of that. And through their advocacy and social agenda, are they affecting or changing public opinion about the impact of discrimination and the reason many disadvantaged workers aren't escaping poverty? And also, how do we encourage more companies to open up their hiring practices to do better training and for better job training and wages? I'm also concerned about the missing or inadequate benefits of health care, pension plans in many cases, and insurance for workers, and too many of the jobs are service-oriented. I have other comments, can I just do my closing summary and say, I'm concerned that missing from the panel today are workers both with positive and negative experiences of this model. You tried your best, Brian. And in conclusion, I want to say, yes, it is a useful model, and it can be a real boon to people seeking to re-enter the job force who have who have experienced circumstances that make them targets of discrimination, or for other reasons they are disadvantaged. The public sector will increasingly depend on these agencies to fill jobs with little advancement opportunity seems to be a possible industry trend, and this is not good enough. And I, who benefited from utilizing such a service, nevertheless would not have wanted the jobs that they had to offer me. I realize there are limits to what any organization can do, but we must ensure that the focus be on serving people, and that is as important as the survival and growth of the business, and in this way lead to real, substantive, positive social change in influencing the rest of the industry. Sorry.
If you don't mind, I'll stand. That allows me more eye contact. Also, sitting still is hard for me. Sitting still and talking is very difficult. First, I want to thank Julia for her perspective. You have a ferocious intellect and bring a conscience to the discussion. I want to thank Chancellor Gora, who, as has been mentioned, is a new member of the Private Industry Council, which is Boston-focused, as well as the Center, and Dr. Friedman and Dr. Carre. Informing policy and practice, I try to be in policy and practice as my professional gig, and we need a lot of information and a lot of research. We're very willing in Boston to try new things. Very ambitious for getting it started. We're a workforce investment board, the Boston PIC. It's a generic, a piece of federal policy and infrastructure that will be sustained in Washington. It's under reauthorization right now. I mean, it would be possible for the federal government to just get out of workforce as a federal priority. One might argue that the shallow funding as compared to any previous administration, Democratic or Republican, is an indication that this is at risk, but it is good that Congress is going to reauthorize the infrastructure of the public purpose of workforce as a context, along with health and housing and education, transportation and public safety. We see workforce as a piece of the national infrastructure, and we need to keep it that way and look for better times. There are no representatives from the temporary or day labor industry on the PIC board, so unlike that other workforce investment board, we won't have any political problems here in Boston should this take hold. And what's exciting about this is the niche, if you will. The analysis says that there is, by implication, inordinate profit-taking in our economy. By implication, inordinate profit-taking in our economy, and that profit-taking, which is inordinate, greed perhaps, sometimes you fall back into the day, can be seized by the means of competition. That those with a conscience can move into that, grab that revenue, and program it for the benefit of the people we serve while continuing to fund the infrastructure. Now, I do not think that is going to displace public revenue. And frankly, public revenue should be responsible for the whole system, beginning with education. But it's very exciting. It's very exciting. Now, the PIC also does a thing called the Boston Compact. And, we stand militant that the public school system, is the infrastructure. And it's also, and I'll get to this by implication later, it's also really important to think of the people who are looking for jobs as members of families, and so many are raising children, and for them the public school system is both the resource and for their children and their hope for the future, because sometimes we don't get out of it. And we hope for our children. So, integrating the workforce and the education experience is really important to our policy and practice in Boston. So that's the pick. Now back to the industry and the free enterprise theory here that social entrepreneurs, such as Project Place, such as Transition to Work Collaborative, such as others out there, might move on this and make it a dynamic part of a workforce development system that cares about inclusion and cares about strengthening communities by supporting people. I want to see the test. I first met Francoise when I came back to Massachusetts in '77 as part of an organization that did target research. Applied research is very active-oriented. We talked about action research back in that day. We always found out where they lived. It was called target research and how they operated. And when we saw a part of society that was engaged in inordinate profit-taking, we would analyze what they were doing and then make a plan to pull that out, to call it out. This is a plan to actually compete with and redirect those resources. I am ever more parochial, as I am in Boston, longer and longer. So, I flipped right to, I think it was page 43 or so, maybe it was 34. But it was the list, it was the scoreboard, and I didn't find the Boston there. And so I immediately dedicated myself to the next list and, hoping that we would foster a Boston, a dynamic version of it. And when Mary spoke to, those discussions, I found it quite exciting. But that's the market test. Can it happen? Can we move on this? Who's buying? I think that's the hard work. There was a lot of manufacturing reliance in the report. We don't have that as a natural employment base. I'm wondering what those other employment bases are. Career centers, a quick word on career centers. Career centers could decide, any one of the 3 career centers in Boston, we have what we call a competitive model. There is a nonprofit organization deeply involved in each of the 3, Jewish Vocational Services with the Workplace, Morgan Memorial Goodwill with CareerLink, and ABCD with JobNet. So any one of those career centers could make a move in partnership or alone in this direction. They are increasingly transactional. A lot of the theory here is that in the transaction there's enough revenue to support services beyond the transaction. They could be involved, any one of them. They tend to go off. The Workplace has gone aggressively after ex-offenders, admittedly with justice revenue as an incentive. CareerLink looked at working with the HIV positive community and found a number of professional pieces. They are universal, and we say that without apology. Social Security, if you have a broad political base in the community of people served at various levels, but everyone eligible, you get a fairly broad political base. To have a former client or customer, as the career centers like to say, now overseeing the career centers across the state, in terms of Jennifer's history, that's a plus and a real argument for having a universal system and then developing these dynamic niches, if you will, these dynamic business practices. Raising visibility, we are not raising visibility for the career centers. I'm sorry, I'd like to. We had a marketing budget in the first year. Word of mouth within 2 to 3 years meant if we advertised we'd be overwhelmed. Now we're completely overwhelmed by the economy. It is an overwhelmed infrastructure. The career centers, we can't tell more. We can't market them right now because we couldn't handle any more business. And now the unemployment insurance system may be directing all its clients to us. We're drowning right now with the universal job labor market exchange system. So we need things like this to happen in the town. to start taking the load of what people need to be brokered through this economy. And my last point would be, I hear the conscience in those who have benefited but are concerned about where the system is going, those who have experienced the temporary or day labor system as exploitive. I hear the conscience and I hear the concern about career ladders, about the context of health care and child care and housing and schools. Be very aggressive in your concern, but be equally aggressive in making this narrow strategy happen. And I'm going to use a tough analogy. I'm early 80s now. The decision to build lots of shelter space right away, 84. I came in with the mayoral. My God, it's 20 years ago when we were running against Mel King, and all the rest of them had fallen by the wayside. It was a shock. This was an incredible moment 20 years ago in 1983. And what we did is we came in and we immediately brought up Long Island Shelter at 450 beds. We supported Pine Street Inn and its explosive expansion. And before you knew it, within several months, there was shelter for all. And we got whacked right away on affordable housing, that it wasn't enough. It was really important to stay ferocious on shelter. Really important to stay ferocious on shelter, even as we were criticized on permanent housing. And that's what I see here. Be ferocious on making this transitional thing happen. Folks need income now. And they need work ethic now. Okay? And then press the rest of us to build the career ladders and give you the housing, health, transportation, and public safety support the system deserves. Thank you.
And as I thank you all for being here, I just want to make a few comments in response to some of the comments that were just made. On behalf of the Center for Social Policy, we are committed to convening an ongoing dialogue around these issues. We are committed to the hard work that Suzanne talked about. Some of the most difficult challenges are the ones that all of you are engaged in trying to figure out how to get over. And I want to commit to you, we are your partner. We're committed to bringing evidence to the table, to being an evaluation partner, to providing the kind of technical assistance that Mary mentioned Francois was providing to the group that's working on this now. And it is our pleasure to be your partner. Thank you so much for being here today. And I look forward, and the rest of our staff look forward to continuing partnerships with you. Take care.